And good, a lot of people here. I want to talk to you, continue on this chapter 10, but I wanted to bring something to your attention here. On Monday, I saw, or you saw, I put together a PowerPoint on your group presentations about power structures and influences and how belief systems and government, wealth, military power, all of these things, they really influence how the work looks. But I wanted to kind of point right to the title here, the Islamic world. And so, if you want to know about the power structure, here it is, right on the title page. And everything that we look at, which is mostly architecture, but a few other things, you should look at it through the lens of Islam. And so much of the architecture and the art and the priorities of the people who lived and believed at this time influenced the art making. So Islam is really the prevailing philosophy, the prevailing belief system. And then secondly, what we have here is in the Islamic world, we have really, instead of having like a great emperor like Justinian or Constantine, we have caliphates. We still use that term. Caliphate means a successor, the successor to the prophet. And so the governing system's a lot different. So paramount, Islam. And I showed you this. This is the Islamic world around 1500. And we talked about Spain. We'll talk about that a little more today too, because you see, this goes back and forth. It was part of the Roman Empire. The Visigoths came in, took it over. The Moors brought Islam here, and basically to this line is the Pyrenees Mountains. And so a lot of times you'll see geographic features defined the borders of a particular country or region. So anyway, Spain goes back and forth. We'll talk about that. And so we talked about the Dome of the Rock and Abraham and Isaac or Ishmael, which tradition you follow. And we talked about the lack of images of saints and angels and prophets in favor of scriptural quotes and elaborate decoration. And then I showed you this. This is the Christiana Amanpour doing a video for ABC News about the Dome of the Rock. And that's where we left off, and in part because after I X'd out of the video, my Zoom share and all of this other stuff. So anyway, just a follow up on the video, And a follow-up on what I just told you about Spain going back and forth. One of the things that happens in these three great Abrahamic religions is that there is a territorial, Alex.
Yes.
Oh, you got it.
Oh, my bad.
Unless you want us to hear what you're talking about. Thank you. But there are territorial disputes about who owns what, because the sites are shared, not just in the Holy Land, but in various other places as well. And so this becomes the fundamental architectural style for a mosque. And you see, this is pretty early on in Islamic faith, 706. And what you have is, this is called a foreclosure or anyway, this is a place where people congregate. This is where people, and you can see folks in this open air atrium sort of structure. And you see the minarets, which come in some ways out of the Roman tradition, as well as the dome, which is also a Roman invention, the archways, Roman columns, basically Greek and Egyptian. So what this culture does is kind of take back and build on a lot of the established architecture and building practices and so on. So anyway, I wanted to, and again, I think did we talk about this? Okay, good. I got these two classes mixed up. But this is one of the things that happens in Islamic architecture, is that much of, if not all of the surface is decorated. And these are mosaics, what you guys know is tiles glued onto a surface and put together in such an arrangement that you have images, designs, and so on. So here we have a set of buildings. We have some trees. And one thing's about the flora, sometimes it's represented and can be, according to Islamic law, actually part of a holy place. Now, these laws change over time, and we see a split in Islam, just like we see a split in Christianity. And we have Shiite Muslims and Sunni Muslims. And then after that, we have imams, and they are essentially the preachers or the priests of Islam. And there's not a whole lot of tight control over that, kind of like, if I could, Protestant religions and so on. There'll be different ways to practice Christianity and some variations in how people practice Islam. And that's also true of the Jewish faith. There's no Jewish pope. It's the rabbis, the imams, the preachers. So anyway, but one thing you don't see in this scene is people. They're not portrayed here. And so you can see some of the mosaic has since fallen off, but if you were 1,300 years old, you'd probably be falling apart too. And so, Umayyad Palace, Jordan, and see, this is in a museum in Berlin. And it's a wonderful example of patterning, and it's a combination of geometric. This diagonal creates particular shapes, and then embedded in that are floral patterns, and there's other kinds of geometric patterns woven into this. So what we see happening in Islam is a real development. I mean, they take the idea of patterning to a whole new level. And we'll talk about some of that here too, because it comes out in different ways. And so another mosque, you can see the similarities, the minaret, the domes. A little more simplistic, a little more refined, but it's all still there. And so forecourt, that's what I wanted to say. This is the forecourt, where you could congregate and so on. And a big part of Islam is connecting. There's a kind of a brotherhood mentality that is really part of the faith. I wanted to bring this word up here too, hypostyle. Anybody wanna remember what hypostyle means? Yeah, it is. It's an Egyptian thing. It's where, and Greeks and Romans, and it just means that it's all supported by columns or pillars. And so that's what all of these dots represent. And so for hypostyle, prayer hall, this is it. And 8, the minaret. 2, I want to show you this. Mihrab. Mihrab dome. It's over the top of the center one. I'll show you a mihrab here. There. Mihrab. And this is from much later, but you can see the decorative quality is just extremely highly developed. But there's a lot of ideas about why this looks like it does. Mihrab in the winter prayer hall of the Friday Mosque, Isfahan, excuse me, Iran. There are people who really kind of think that this is something that developed out of Christian churches. They would have a nave. It would be a cutout in the wall where they would place a statue of some sort, Mary or Joseph or so on. But in Islam, there's no such provision for that kind of representation. And this is a place where someone would actually pray, just like in Christianity, except there's not that object. It's just the mosque. And so, the minaret from Great Mosque in Samarra, Iraq. And this is kind of modeled off of a lot of things from antiquity. A lot of people talk about the step pyramids. Some talk about the columns with the spiral frieze going up to the top. Some reference the Old Testament, which is part of Islam too, the Tower of Babel. And that is something that is, and this is in Iraq, that is ancient Mesopotamia. And so the idea being that there are some things from the existing culture that actually influence the local practice of Islam. And so this is a mausoleum of the Samanids. Again, brickwork, like this is in Uzbekistan, which is deeper into Asia and part of the old Soviet Union, by the way. It's east of Armenia and Turkey. And anyway, Islam spreads all over the globe. And this is the early 10th century, but let me show you. Uzbekistan, that's way up here. And we haven't seen, at least in this course, anything from that far away from the Mediterranean yet. And so everything has been mostly centered here. They talk about, and this is mentioned in the book, but apparently it's in the next volume. They talk about Islamic architecture in India, as you saw on the map. Islam spread to India, and the rulers were Muslim. And so probably one of the greatest architectural marvels of all time is in India. It's called a Taj Mahal, and it's actually a monument, a tomb for what would have been the Raja, the Shah, the ruler of the time was Muslim, and he built this magnificent monument to his beloved wife. And so, but that is, you'll see, that's a lot of this same thing, even more advanced with the idea of the decoration, and the thing about the domes actually become more sophisticated because it's bulb-like, which is even harder to do architecturally. But it's not in the book, and partly because it's just past the time period. But it's mentioned. And one of the other great architectural accomplishments of the Islamic world is right here in Cordoba, Spain. And it's called the Great Mosque. And it is from, I'll show you the map again. It's from where Moorish people from North Africa, and this Moor, I mean, is modern day Morocco, which is, and they come across the Straits of Gibraltar and they pretty much settle in Spain. This part, it's called the Iberian Peninsula, and the Iberian Peninsula had been, it had changed hands in terms of who owned it. You know, for a couple of centuries, the Romans owned it, the Visigoths, and the Moors, and so on. And so anyway, it's a place that has changed hands. And so why am I asking, or why am I telling you all of this? This mosque was rededicated as the Cathedral of St. Mary in 1236. So it's a mosque and it's a cathedral. We saw the Hagia Sophia go from being a cathedral to a mosque. And in part, at least to me, and this is my humble opinion, but I think the conversion from one religion to the next and back and forth has everything to do with the fundamental similarities of the religions. And there are certain things that certainly the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims disagree upon, but there's a lot that they have in common, including what they see as holy sites. And so anyway, when the Christians took control, they rededicated this. And this is one of the great architectural accomplishments of the Islamic world. And it is, as you can see, the hypo style, all of the columns, and what they do with the archways. Very interesting. They're not just archways, they're decorated archways. And even, it's just, how can I say, it'll take your breath away. I put a star on this, and in part because it is one of the great architectural marvels. And I brought this YouTube video partly because the still pictures don't really give you a good idea of really how magnificent this is. Look at the size of this. This is huge. And so it today coexists as a mosque and a cathedral. And it's still, as I was saying, they're still fighting over it. There we go.
There's always people that say evolution is just random.
Oh, come on. All right. Now I got to get the screen right. Hang with me. Can you guys see this at home? The Purposeful Universe official trailer.
We can see it.
Oh, okay, good. That's what I want to know. This is an ad.
We have it to
The relationship between church and state has always been a thorny issue. The case of the Mosque Cathedral of Cordoba is one of the most delicate topics in Spain. The current government accuses the diocese of having claimed ownership of the temple and was supposedly state-owned. The church would only be able to manage the Mosque Cathedral, but never to declare itself the owner. The diocese defends the ownership of the cathedral because in the 13th century, the king donated it to them. The Bishop of Cordoba warns that in reality, much more at stake, the relationship with the Islamic world.
La città cattedrale di Córdoba, tante scuole.
The Mosque Cathedral Cordoba's property title is in the name of the church after King Ferdinand III himself donated it. Furthermore, there is this document in the Islamic Art that details the donation of the cathedral to the Bishop and Church of Cordoba. Once a basilica, King Ferdinand III ordered it to be consecrated as a cathedral. It is a symbol of the relationship between Islam and Christianity. There are those who are interested in making it not only a symbol of that relationship, but also a symbol of conflict.
The Mosque Cathedral of Cordoba has a complex history. It began as a Christian basilica to the arrival of Muslims in Spain in the 8th century. Mosque was built over it. With the passing of the centuries, it was extended until it reached its maximum splendor, with Al-Masur in the 10th century. At that time, it was only surpassed by Mecca. In the 13th century, Ferdinand III reconquered the city and donated a majestic building to the church, who erected it again as a Christian temple. Now Muslim groups demand shared prayer so that both Christians and Muslims can use the temple. However, the Bishop of Cordoba is not convinced that's the right solution. We recall that there are Catholic temples in the Muslim world that are in a very different situation.
Esta misma situación de Córdoba se produce solo ahora.
The same Cordoba situation occurs only in Santa Sofia, that a precious basilica is now a museum and has once been and can become again a mosque. Or in Famagusta in Cyprus, also a Greek Gothic cathedral, has been converted into a mosque by facts of history and conquest.
Controversy such Mosque Cathedral of Cordoba can upset the relationship between Christianity and Islam. In today, the dialogue between the two has undergone certain improvements. Much of this is thanks to meetings such as that of Pope Francis and the Imam of Al-Azhar, the historic Muslim university where future Sunni imams are formed. Hopefully, Pope Francis's trip to Morocco in March 2019 can continue to foster a cordial atmosphere. The situation.
Can you keep it on the screen and press share and then just go to your PowerPoint and file? Yeah, but we don't have to worry about one back.
Oh, well,
At the bottom of the screen, there are PowerPoint icon.
oh, yeah, I see. I see what you're saying. Just go there. Perfect. And so here are some, can you guys hear me at home?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
doing a check.
Peter. Yes.
So, you know, the idea of designs too, this is like really kind of really very interesting. One of the things that they did, I showed you here, mihrab. And what they did at the Cathedral of St. Mary, as they call it, is that they just basically put statues in these mihrabs. There were a lot of things. If you take a look at that video, you can see they just basically added on. And he talked, and the bishop there in the film talked about Saint Sophia, which is the highest Sophia in Istanbul, Constantinople. And so, and he mentioned one that was in Cyprus. And again, these things change hands. He had talked about the Hagia Sophia being a museum, but that since has changed. It's a mosque again, and that's happened within the last year or year and a half. But it's complicated. And so, as you can see, this is in Cordoba. I always say it Cordova, but it's Cordoba. And this was not just like a holy site. What happened in Islam at this time, in the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th centuries, is that Islam, the place is controlled by Islam. The Islamic world, if you will, flourished. It was like far ahead of what was happening in what we call the Western world, which is Europe, basically. And so it has everything to do with the decline of the Western Roman Empire. And all of these territories that were formerly part of the Roman Empire were left to govern themselves. Christianity spread via the Christians and their 200, 500 years of rule of Christian Romans, but it developed in a whole other way. But what was happening in the Islamic world is that they were still making great buildings. They learned and discovered new things of mathematics, of physiology, of astronomy, mathematics. Did I say mathematics already? Philosophy, learning, reading. They had mentioned briefly in that film the Islamic library that was at Cordoba, and that was huge. But literacy was promoted. What we find in Europe at the time is the literacy rate goes down. So these were learned, scientific, advanced civilization. And I got a little story about that. During the Renaissance, the time when Europe kind of came back full throttle. They became advanced, they became powerful, they started sending, for instance, like Columbus to North America, when a lot of things were happening in the arts and sciences. One of the things that they did in the early Renaissance was look to the Islamic world and the Arabian world for what they knew. And one of the things the artists, the visual artists, believed in Europe, they didn't understand how people, the human eye, actually worked. And they had all kinds of theories, like, for one, that your eyes emanated light and lit up everything. This is true, that you would see. Or that your eyes took on the color of whatever it is you're looking at. Another seemingly crazy theory. And they went to the Italians in Florence at the time, roughly 1400. They found a book by a guy from the Muslim world. His name was Al-Hazan, and he knew how the eye worked. The lens, light comes into the eye, and it comes in, and the lens actually turns what you see upside down, but your brain readjusts that, simply put. We didn't know how all of that, much of that worked for a long time, but we understood perception because they went and looked at the writings and research of Al-Hazan, which helped them out tremendously in creating linear perspective and being able to perfect the illusion of three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. And so the Islamic world was way advanced. There's a little something in here too. You can't really see it quite so much. Can you see my cursor? You see that swastika in there, the Nazi sign? I know, I didn't notice it for ages.
It used to mean peace.
It did. Yeah, the Nazi, that's another thing I can talk about. Yes, it used to mean peace, and it's a symbol that was adopted from South Asia. And in the Buddhist tradition, they paste swastikas all over the place because, as Charlotte said, it means peace. Yeah. And so, yeah, but this is what an advanced culture does. Look at these archways. Look at the surface detail on this. Look at, it's not just an archway, but they, you know, we're going from this to that. And so right now, and as far as I know, you saw Pope Francis talking to the imam about, you know, sharing the space. And I think they really do. I saw when I was doing some looking around, thinking what I want to talk to you guys about. There are places that have not really been converted over to Catholicism. You saw the main cathedral part, but there are other places, much like this, where there's no Christian iconography or anything. And so Muslims still come in here to pray. And I saw this video, a YouTube video of somebody sneaking over to the other side and taking pictures and got in trouble, but you know, just say. The dome of the mihrab in the Great Mosque, and I showed you that floor plan just a little while ago. Where'd it go? Never mind. That's in front of the building. And so here are other examples of mosques: minarets, domes, open courtyard, prayer hall. Two, open courtyard. And that's the mihrab that I was telling you about. And again, this is from Iran, and you can see it's in relatively poor shape, but you can still pick out. And so, two lions, confronting lions at a palm tree. And so this is the 8th century. And again, like I say, some of those things about representation. I showed you the place where it has trees. In this case, it has a tree and some animals. And so they're a little kind of different from place to place. And as I was saying about an advanced culture, what happens is that the arts really develop. And so this is ivory, and this is carved ivory. And you can see there are figures in here, lions, and other animals, a duck, an eagle, and so on. So like I say, those ideas about representation, they kind of, it's not hard and fast. I had the pleasure of having someone whose family was from Iran in my class last year. We talked about this a lot. It was just gold because she had insight. She was practicing Muslim. And she really straightened me out about a lot of the things, especially considering the second commandment. And so like in Iran, they don't, representations of the prophet are prohibited, but the idea of having representations for certain kinds of things is just okay. And so if you see images from Iran, you will see images of the Ayatollah, for example. And in the more strict and more orthodox places, you wouldn't see it. But this is a pyxis. And what that means is that it is a round container with a dome top. So it's just.
I talked about this piece in my other art class I took in high school. I love this piece.
Isn't it?
It's gorgeous.
It's magnificent. I agree, fully magnificent. So what else did they add to all of that? That when you looked at it before? Yeah.
We really looked into, all of the carving. I don't know what website we use, but we could like zoom in and look very, very closely at all the carving that we did. And we talked about the Islamic calligraphy on the rim. I don't
Yes.
remember what it means, but it's a story
Right.
about someone.
Well, see, and this is something that's really kind of interesting too, to me.
I think it was given to a prince, I think, as a gift. For like his birthday or
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't remember exactly, but
Yeah, I kind of know little bits about that too. So, you know, to me, one of the things that's real interesting about Arabic writing is that it takes on its own decorative qualities too, more than like we use Roman letters, but
Islamic calligraphy is gorgeous. I did a presentation on it and oh my gosh, I loved it.
yes,
It's so beautiful.
it is. And so, yeah, you can, when you zoom in, you can see the exquisite carving. This is what. And so here is a ewer. Do you guys know what a ewer is? You are going to get in trouble if you get that wrong on the test. No, I'm just making that up. A ewer is a container for liquids like water. A ewer is a water container. And this is kind of interesting too, because it's actually this, you would put water in here, and you would tip it over and pour a glass of water on it, but it's disguised as in the form of a bird. And so metalworking, ivory carving, this is just another part of this advanced culture that flourishes in the Islamic world. It's the writing, it's the arts, it's the architecture, and in a lot of ways, it is pretty much responsible in bridging the gap between antiquity and modern Europe, Renaissance Europe. And so, yeah, this is like that too. It's a copper, silver inlay. And here we go, a Quran page, and that Arabic script that we were just talking about is amazing. And what you have here, this is 9th or 10th century, ink and gold on vellum. And so this is something we're going to look at here again when we get into medieval Europe. And so we didn't have printing presses. And so in order to get information from one place to the other to have it stored, you would have a library, but the libraries would be full of books that were produced by hand. They would be called manuscripts. Means by hand, which is the same root word for manual labor. And script means writing, and it's the same word or same root of like scripture, the written word. And so, and then you have, and it is Quran page. And in this power structure, in this civilization, that would be one of the most important things to put in writing, and that is the Quran, the holy book. It's the same way we'll see in medieval Europe as well. But yeah, this is, even if you can't read it, it's just beautiful. And the Blue Quran, and this is from Tunisia, which is North Africa, and it's still in that sphere that I'm talking about Western North Africa, Spain, Morocco, that place. Blue dyed vellum, again. And so this is earthenware, which is a kind of ceramic. It's an Arabic proverb, and it's from Iran. And again, it's words, but it's also, like we're talking about, wonderful, beautiful decoration. And so Here we go. Palace of the Lions, Alhambra, Granada, Spain. So I want to bring this up too, because see that date, 1354? That's 100 years after this was rededicated. So Islam doesn't really like go away. It changes hands and power changes hands, and they talk about this Federico III, King of Spain, gave this to the church, but it goes back and forth, and to some extent, we're still fighting over things. But again, this is the inside of the dome. Again, wonderful, beautiful decoration. And again, in Alhambra, Granada, Spain, Court of the Lions, Palace at Alhambra, Granada, Spain. I'll show you where that is on the map now too, because that too is important. Granada, here, closer, a little to the Mediterranean, a little south. Cordoba is a little north. So they are two different places and two different dominant religions. And so, I'll slow down because I like looking at this stuff. And so, Islamic architecture and this beautiful, magnificent decoration, this kind of structure with the open courtyard, we see that in a mosque, by the way. We also see that kind of structure in ancient Roman architecture as well. They would have, would call it a plaza or something, and they would have this open area where people would congregate, and the idea about it being lions. There they are, right there in the center fountain. And with that, look at that exquisite patterning decoration. That's amazing. And so we see that mosques, they develop, for the most part, the exteriors become a little less decorative, but the interiors get more decorative. Illuminated Tagra of the Suleiman, magnificent. Another ink, paint, and gold on paper. Calligraphy, image, design. And I put this in. This is the mosque of Selim II in Turkey. And I put this in here because, in part, this is very much like the Hagia Sophia, or the Saint Sophia, as the Roman Catholics would talk about it. But it was built as a mosque, and it has all of the elements and minarets, the domes, the archways, etc. And so anyway, this becomes the design. It's become the epitome of Islamic architecture. And here is the interior of that. Like I say, outside, not so decorative. Inside, mega decorative. And they still do some of the things with the archways, but instead of just having lines they actually do a zigzag pattern on, you know, it's like almost like they look at every square inch and how can I make this more interesting. And so here's that mirror rob that I was talking about, or A1, mosaic tile work, Iran, developed out of the niche of a Christian cathedral. And so here we are in the 16th century, and that's the 1500s. And so at some point, some of this decorative quality emerges back on the exterior parts. And so the entrance, this is so beautiful. Anyway, what I wanted to end on here with the Islamic art is this. This is a carpet of the funerary mosque of Sheikh Safi al-Din in Iran. And what happens, I was showing you all the metalwork and the ivory carving. One of the art forms that really flourish, especially in Iran, this would be called a Persian rug. And how should I say this? If we were 75 years ago and I mentioned the Persian rug, everybody would know what that is. It's like the, pardon? Oh yeah, cool. It's like the gold standard of rugs. And in fact, if you go to the art auctions, like at Christie's and Sotheby's, these things, and especially the more ancient ones, they go for tons of money. And so this is yet another instance of those same values of Islamic art applied to something as previously as mundane as a floor covering. And we see this is from Egypt. And what happens at this time, the enamel decoration, the lamps, the rugs, and other things that have utility, ewers and so on. What happens is by the 14th, 13th, 14th century, there's a lot of trade going on between the Middle East and the Islamic world and the newly emerging Western world. As a matter of fact, this is why, at least in part, why the Renaissance erupted or developed in Italy, because they were right there on the Mediterranean and they traded with the countries in the Islamic world. And that's where all of the craftspeople were. And for instance, the Florentines would take wool and other commodities from Central Europe, bring them down, sell that wool to the traders from the Middle East, take that back to places like Egypt, Iran, Syria, and so on. And then they would bring back things like Persian rugs and lamps and other kinds of very precious utilitarian things. And so here is another part of a manuscript. And you can see this is this is late 15th century. That kind of changes, but we still see the same tradition of the illuminated manuscript, and I'm pointing to this because there is a parallel in Central Europe at this time. And so this is the baptistry of St. Louis. And so we really believe that this was made in Egypt for Europeans. Now, St. Louis, that's our saint. St. Louis IX, he was a crusader. He fought the Muslims trying to reconquer the Holy Land. But bottom line is, this is a baptistry. And so we have, if you wanted, in today's world, if there's an equivalent, where do you go for high tech? Might go to Japan or China or the US or something. And usually it's kind of a mixture of everything. Silicon Valley, and they manufacture it in China or something. But my point being is that when there's this interaction between cultures, when cultures are trading, that's actually a very good thing. I'm a capitalist. I'm an American capitalist. And I think that that is one of the things that keeps the peace. When people interact and you buy my stuff and I'll buy your stuff. And so anyway, that is really what I get out of this. And this is a canteen with episodes from the life of Jesus. It's from Syria. It's from the 13th century. And again, it was made for European consumption. And there's the Christ, and there's a couple of angels, and they have all of these different scenes like this. Diane had to use the zoom in so much, but it's so intricate. But this could be the birth of Christ. This over here is a shepherd, and here's one of the magi bringing gifts. You see, anyway, the life of Christ. And here's the Virgin Mary. There's the baby Jesus, just like the iconography that we were talking about. And so, canteen with episode from the life of Christ. And so, what time is it? Oh, it's 1:01. Any questions? Did I put all you guys to sleep? I hope not, because I had a lot of fun talking about this stuff, but more, I have fun looking at this stuff and thinking about it. So that's all I have for the week. You guys stay safe. Enjoy this beautiful weather. It's going to be one of the last best times, I think.
I'm surprised that this even happened.
I know, me too. Hey, it reminds me of my favorite poem.
What's that?
No sun, no birds, no leaves, November. Just say.
My mom and I like to say that Missouri's weather is from. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.